Good morning Year 6 and welcome to Monday's English lesson. Where this week we're going to carry on with our new book Leon and the Place Between, and our learning objective today is to understand the use of descriptive language. And that's really important in a story. Often when we don't have a nice picture book like this, we really rely on the author's language to bring that story to life. Just like Eagle in the Snow we're reading at the moment, and Letters from the Lighthouse, and how we can start to picture that in our minds. So we're going to be looking at some of that today. Okay, to start off with today, I want you to play a little game called Babble Gabble. If you've got someone you're with at home or in class, can you pause the video? I want you to spend a minute each, take it in turns, to tell your partner what happened in this story. So not absolutely everything, but how would you give a summary to someone who's not read it? Okay, how did you go? How did you get on? Did you remember all the key points, all those different bits we looked at? And it might help you to look back at your work from last week, where we had those different photographs of from the book, and you did a sentence to summarise, to form a synopsis, an overview of the story. And I want to just draw our attention back to our knowledge organiser from last week. Last week we looked at this section here, the main features, and starting to unpick the structure of a fantasy story. You have looked at the structure of Leon and the Place Between, and also the other day I got you to go back to your cold task and to find out those examples in your cold task. Our next part of the unit, we're also going to be looking at the grammar side with fantasy stories. Okay, I want us to start with this picture. Do you recognise this? This is from the opening picture from the book, before we meet any text and before we begin the story. It's really powerful because it tells us lots of information. How would you describe that tent? Can you think of some adjectives to describe it? Look at the textures. What material might it be made of? Look at the use of colours. Look at the intricate detail on there. Could you use a simile to describe the tent? We know the little boy in the green jumper and shorts on is called Leon. How do you think he's feeling about going inside the tent? And are those feelings the same as his friends or his brother and sister and brothers behind him? What do you think? And if you've been to a circus before, did you feel the same or did you feel different? Do you remember we looked at our feelings grid last term when we did Letters from the Lighthouse? And I want us just to look at this again, but instead of Olive from Letters from the Lighthouse, we've got our character of Leon there. And up here we've got the feelings lens, what we use for book talk, but started to use in our writing as well. And we used this, didn't we, to think about positive and negative intent and how we could almost grade those feelings, how positive, how happy, how negative, how sad. So I want us to take how Leon's feeling at that stage there about going into the tent, and these plot points. So number one, the first bubble, is Leon and his siblings arrive at the tent. Where on the scale of positive and negative would you put that? And what word to describe that feeling would you choose? And then as we move on to the next bit, where Leon and his siblings or friends go inside the tent. And again, what would that be? Positive or negative? Would it be more or less than plot point one? And what word would you use to describe that feeling? So pause the video, have a think or a discussion about that. And as you can see, I've had a go here, and I think plot point 1, when Leon and his siblings arrive at the tent, he's feeling happy. We know that, we could see from his face, it's not negative, it's happy. I wouldn't put it right up here at number 10, but it's into the happy. He doesn't know what's happening yet. And then when he goes inside the tent, I think those feelings have a greater positive intent. So I go from happy to excited. Did yours look like that too? And when we're writing our stories, it's often handy to think of it like this, because it helps us choose the right vocabulary to capture that right mood and to describe those characters' feelings. Okay, setting. Why is setting description really important in a story? You might want to pause the video and have a discussion. You can see here we've got some images from Harry Potter and the setting that J.K. Rowling builds in her stories. So forget the films for a minute and any pictures like we've got here in front of us, but just from her stories. She really takes time to describe the setting. So the story isn't just dialogue and action of what things happen, but to describe it so we get to picture those very scenes in Hogsmeade and in the Great Hall. We get to picture what it's like. And for each one of us it will be different as how we organise it, and that's absolutely fine in our minds. And I'm a strong believer of it's always better to read a book first, like the Harry Potter books. Read it first before you read a film. And often you'll find the books have far much more detail than what we see in the film, or the films can sometimes change things to how the author intended. I put 2 questions there. What can we infer from the setting? So when we have a description of a story, does it give me clues about what's going to happen in the story or the mood of the story? And in turn, what effect does it have on us as the reader? Are we made to like that setting, or are we afraid of that setting? Think of how a setting might be described in a ghost story, and it made to make us feel scared, or to be scared of the unknown as to what might happen next. With the books we've read, like Letters from the Lighthouse, and we were able to build up a picture in our minds of Budmouth Point. Remember when we did that setting description lesson on it? Okay, today we're going to focus on a different setting, just to build up our setting skills, and it's this one. And I don't know where it's come from, as in which story it came from, but it's a fantasy story. What can you see there? Have a good look round. Where could it be? Who might be in these huts or houses? What time of year is it? What time of day is it? Is it in the past? Is it in the present? Is it in the future? If we were to expand that camera outwards, what would be around? Would it be more of the same, or are these huts or houses completely on their own? Pause the video and you might want to discuss it, or write down your initial thoughts. Okay, let's have a look. So we've got a short setting description to describe this picture. I just want you to listen first of all, and you can follow it on the screen. There's also a PDF version of this picture and text on the website. I want you to think, how has the author described this setting? If we don't have that picture there, how can we picture it in our minds? What techniques are they using? What can we infer from it? What clues do we get from it? And what's the effect on us as a reader? Is it somewhere we want to be? Okay, here we go. The silvery moon smiled down on the village that night. The wind, for once, ceased its whistling and retired to the distant mountains. Although still flowing, the winding river seemed to have almost stopped, resting, awaiting the coming of the morning. The round houses stood silently in thought, the smoke drifting slowly from their chimneys, indicating that everyone was safely in for the night. The snow that clung to the neighbouring peaks had not yet reached the sleepy hamlet with its icy grip. Perched on top of the steep yet small cliffs, the huts encircled their inhabitants, hugging them warmly. Lights inside and out shone brightly, golden, contrasting with the ghostly orb hanging in the sky. At a glance, a visitor would assume the dwelling places to be built from the same plan, but upon closer inspection each was unique. One had a multitude of emerald eyes, rather like a spider, in its roof. Another had a covered veranda and a tall slate chimney stack. Yet another had a lower floor dug out from the sharp slope down to the water, surrounded on one side by a two-tiered balcony. All had one thing in common: wooden decorations, intricately carved, forming the framework of each domed roof house. The tranquillity of the scene suggested that all was well in this valley, that the village folk had nothing to fear. Only those who lived there knew of the terrors that the morning would bring. In fact, anyone living this close to the mountain caves knew that all was not as it seemed. Okay, what I'd like you to do is a lot of detail from those 4 paragraphs, and they're building up that picture of this scene here. What I'd like you to do, using this grid, and I've included the grid on the website, or you can just draw it yourself, you don't have to print it out. I'd like you to fill it, read the text again to yourself, and I'd like you to fill it with words and phrases I like. So what do you think are powerful? What helps you visualise this setting clearly? And I don't want you to copy a whole paragraph there, I just want you to bullet point some of your ideas. And then on the other side, the other column, words and phrases you want to know. So maybe there's some phrases there you're not sure about, or maybe it's an adjective or verb you're not really sure, and that's fine, and that's how we learn what those mean. So if you can pause the video and have a go at those, please. Okay, how did you get on? Have you managed to put ideas in both? Let's have a look. So I'm going to read it again, but this time I'm going to stop and I'm going to pick out, you don't have to have picked out the same as me, but if I was doing it I might have picked out these, and I'm going to share with you why I have picked them. The silvery moon smiled down on the village that night. I really like that use of the adjective silvery, because it shows me that it wasn't cloudy, it was a clear night sky and it almost looks silvery. I like that. I also really like that choice of verb there, instead of just look down but smiled down, and think of the intent with that word, and it has a positive impact on you as a reader, and it almost makes it like personifies the moon, gives the moon human characteristics. The wind for once ceased its whistling and retired to the distant mountains. I like that phrase, embedded phrase there between the commas, for once, which suggests it normally doesn't stop whistling and it's really windy place. And it's retired, a synonym, instead of going away, going back, not just to the mountains, but the mountains in the distance, the distant mountains, and you can see that on the picture. Although still flowing, the winding river seemed to have almost stopped, resting, awaiting the coming of the morning. And I like that. Can you see I've just highlighted that dash there, because it's giving me extra information, and I like that punctuation effect. The round houses stood silently in thought, the smoke drifting slowly from their chimneys, indicating that everyone was safely in for the night. And I like that as well, personifying the houses, saying that they're standing silently in thought. Can a house stand in thought? And you've also got alliteration there, stood silently, just has a greater impact on us. Into what they're thinking about. The snow that clung to the icy neighbouring peaks had not yet reached the sleepy hamlet with its icy grip. And that icy grip as if really powerful on the hamlet, the place where they live, and it's not yet managed that. It shows me it's got some power. Perched on top of the steep yet small cliffs, the huts encircled their inhabitants, hugging them warmly. And again, that's another example personifying, giving them a human characteristics, these huts. They're encircling, they're keeping them round the inhabitants. And I like the way that sentence starts with a verb, and you should remember that, how to do that, because it's really effective. And perched, it's kind of on the edge there. And they're steep yet small. We talk about yet with our fanboys, and it adds more detail into that sentence. Lights inside and out shone brightly, golden, contrasting with the ghostly orb hanging in the sky. And again, there's another use of a dash there, giving me more information, telling me it's golden. And I like that semicolon, and that's something which we're going to try and use tomorrow in our writing, to split two closely related clauses. At a glance, a visitor would assume the dwelling places to be built from the same plan, but upon closer inspection, each was unique. I like that verb choice, assume, instead of think. It's a bit more interesting. One had a multitude of emerald eyes, rather like a spider, in its roof. Another had a covered veranda and a tall slate chimney stack. Instead of green, I like the way the author's chosen the word emerald. And I like that simile, rather like a spider. Do you remember me saying to you at the start of this lesson, can you think of a simile to describe the tent? I like that use here of one. Yet another had a lower floor dug out from the sharp slope down to the water, surrounded on one side by a two-tier balcony. I like that hyphenated word there, and that's something we're trying to include in our writing. It's a good idea to magpie them, to write them down when you see them in your writing. And it gives me more information to tell me what that balcony is like. It's got two levels to it. All had one thing in common, wooden decorations, intricately carved, forming the framework of each dome-roofed house. You've got another hyphenated word there, I've not highlighted. And can you see where I've highlighted the use of a colon there? It's like an equals. All had one thing in common, and it's telling me what that is. It can be used for a list, but it also can be used to split clauses like this. And it's not just carved, it's intricately carved, meaning in lots of detail. The tranquillity of the scene suggested that all was well in this valley, that the village folk had nothing to fear. Do you know what tranquillity means? Yeah, it means peace, doesn't it? And it suggests it's well, yet at the end it says, in fact, anyone living close to this mountain caves knew that all was not as it seemed. So you've got this peaceful description, but then you've got this undercurrent to it, knowing that there is something going on there, maybe something to fear. So when we're talking about what can we infer from the setting and the effect on the reader, hopefully you've included something like I have here. You've got the words or the phrases you like, and maybe some words like this where you want to just double check, and that's fine. If you've got a dictionary at home or at school, you can have a look at what those mean. Or you can have a chat about it with someone, and how would you describe it to someone else? And I just want to finish, we've talked about a lot today about setting and what makes a powerful setting description. And remember, all these little lessons over the next few weeks are to build our skill for when we next write our fantasy story. At school we have our vocabulary vault books. If you're at school you can use yours. If you're at home, if you want to use a piece of paper, or you can even fold it like one of those little origami books, can you start to magpie, you start to pinch some of those words, like what we had here, the ones from words and phrases I like, maybe set up a page all about setting. So you've got today's words, maybe categorise them into adjectives and verbs. You could also start to collect them from your own reading. Do you remember we talked about the lenses when we do guided reading? How do you feel? What do you notice? What could you touch? What could you hear? What could you smell? They would all help me with a setting description. You could even use those icons and start to build up a page, so when you come to write your own story, it will help you. Okay, going to leave it there, and tomorrow's lesson we're going to build up on this and start to do some writing. Thank you, Year 6.